Okay, now back in 2012, we put up this graphic, really because we just liked the graphic. But it was a bit of a cheeky slide, given there'd been no wells in the area. But we asked the question, are there elephants lurking under the deep waters of Senegal? Well, we didn't know. There'd never been a deep water well drilled in that time. Now, I'm going to talk about what's happened since and what's going to happen in the next few years. First of all, a snapshot of FAR today. We're now the 5th largest E&P company on the ASX. We made those basin opening fan and SNE discoveries in 2014, and those were the first ever deep water wells. SNE was ranked by IHS as the world's largest discovery of that year. A very short period from discovery to a statement on commerciality, and we were awarded the Breakthrough Company of the Year for 2016 by the Oil and Gas Council of Africa and African Explorer of the Year in 2017. So we're based in Australia, but we are very strongly focused in Africa. We've got a permit in Kenya, but 8 permits on the west coast, and that area of Senegal and Guinea-Bissau is where we have our main focus. Now, when we first farmed in, it was back in 2006, so that's now 11 years ago, and Hunt Oil of America was the operator at the time, and I know Ian Cockrell is sitting somewhere in the audience and grinding his teeth a little bit, but they held the equity and we farmed in to partially fund a very large 3D survey. The permit itself was 15,000 square kilometres, and that's very large. Some basins aren't even that big, but it was very much unproven. So we shot that very large 3D survey, and what that identified was a number of different play types. And Hunt did some very good early work, but very soon after that, Hunt exited the area and went back to the US. Now, the 2 main play types we saw were an early Cretaceous carbonate shelf play and also the traditional play in that area, which is the deep water fans. Now, as I said, Hunt left the area, so that left a small Australia-based company with 90% equity, but also 100% liability. And that's a bit of a challenge when you have to fund a deep water well. So that was the state of play at the time. Now, if we look regionally in terms of the drilling context, there have been very large discoveries made in Ghana by Tullow, Cosmos and others, including the Jubilee field, which was 1 billion barrels, and that really kick-started exploration along that transform margin. So through Côte d'Ivoire with a number of successes, Liberia, Sierra Leone, success was starting to diminish, and Sabi was essentially a dry well in Guinea-Conakry. And then the Cora well was drilled, which FAR was a partner in, and that was a spectacularly dry well. And effectively, that ended that thrust of exploration, and really it affected FAR a lot because our share price collapsed to about 2.5 cents. Well, about that time, FAR rebranded, quite a new management team, new technical team, and for the first time that 3D seismic survey was worked up. And we came up with a number of new ideas, including a deeper basinal play below those slope fan turbidites, and also a shelfal play sitting on top of the carbonates. This was a clastic play, and it was sitting under a large canyon, and it was called Lupa Lupa, the Lupa Lupa prospect. And Lupa Lupa is Wolof, the local dialect for butterfly, because of that butterfly shape. Now, the data we had at the time was depth stretch 2-way time data, and you can see that Lupa Lupa is strongly affected by that overlying canyon, and there's a significant push down in the middle of that. So that made it a rather subtle feature, and is probably why it wasn't identified earlier. Now, we eventually acquired pre-stack depth migrated data, but this was only after the 2nd appraisal well, and you can see now that there's a nice amplitude feature which conforms to structure, but of course we didn't have that at the time. So with a new portfolio of prospects and leads, we managed to farm out to Cairn of Edinburgh and Conoco of the US. It was a $200 million program consisting of 2 wells, so it was a very good farm out for us to do, and Cairn became the operator. So they went out and contracted a rig straight out of Brazil called the Cajun Express, and they spudded the Fan 1 well. Now, I'm just showing this as an example of the sort of well you should never want to be involved in. It was meant to take 60 days. It took nearly 200 days. It was meant to cost about $55 million. It cost nearly $250 million. So our $200 million cap and our carry was blown on that first well. So we're already paying our equity share at that point in time. And there's a portion of that curve which lasts for 50 days where we didn't drill a metre. And when your spread rate is $1.3 million a day, it creates a lot of financial stress. So it was a fairly nervous time in the Far Office. Now, just by way of comparison, the rig we had, the Cajun Express, was not really capable of doing its job, which was one of the problems. So I'm just showing an example of what a modern rig can do and when you have that local knowledge which you gain from drilling. So SNE North, which is our most recent well, was 9 days from spud to TD. It took a total of 26 days, but that included about 3 extra days of logging to gain data for the SNE development, and it cost $21 million. So that's the sort of improvement you can get, and it's a lesson of how important the right rig is. And unfortunately, it wasn't really a buyer's market at that time. Anyway, also fortunately, Fan was a discovery, so that forgives a lot. We sampled oil from a number of different levels, high quality oil. We drilled through a 500 metre thick oil-bearing interval. We did not see water in the well. So we really don't know how big this feature could be. It's certainly got a large oil in place. The operators' numbers range from 250 million barrels to 2.5 billion barrels. These are in-place numbers. But the well also proved up a very high quality, very thick, oil-prone source interval. And that gave us a lot of encouragement for drilling the next well, which was that Lupa Lupa prospect, named by Ken as SNE. This was much simpler. It's got a single 100-metre oil column. It's got excellent reservoir quality, and the resources on this slide are up to 640 at the time. The resource size was 330 million barrels. Okay, now the size of SNE has changed over time, and originally it was mapped on that amplitude anomaly, and that turned out to be the gas cap. So relatively small. Of course, if you put 100 metres of oil underneath that, it gets bigger. So this was Cairns' initial number, which they put out even before we'd TD'd that well, which was very quick. Now, SNE was drilled within the main canyon, and you can see here that the canyon fill is very complex, and there's also a seafloor feature as well. So that caused pushdown and also a lot of velocity anomalies, and the well came in somewhat off prognosis. So we drilled the next well, SNE2, in the middle of the canyon to get that velocity information, and then we drilled SNE3 and Bellatrix 1 just outside the canyon. Now, SNE2 came in more or less on prognosis. SNE3 and Bellatrix came in about 35 metres high to prognosis. And what that did was to raise the flanks of the field and make it a lot larger. So if we look at where we were after SNE1, we put those extra wells in the picture and you can see a much larger feature. Since then, there's been more appraisal. Our most recent audited numbers are those 641 million barrels. We'll shortly be releasing our next update. Okay, how big is that on a map of Perth? Well, it extends from Duncraig down as far as Canning Vale. If you want to walk the length of it, it'll take you quite a long time. Now, all the appraisal wells have been very successful. So there's been 8 wells now. Every well has seen about 100 metres of oil column. Minimum economic field size has been well and truly smashed out of the park. We've now completed the appraisal campaign. The last 2 wells, SNE5 and SNE6, we're targeting the upper sands and addressing a few of the remaining uncertainties. The Vega Regulus well is shown on this cross-section on the left-hand side. That saw the highest oil-bearing sand section that we've seen in any well to date. So an excellent result. We've also carried out DSTs on 4 of the wells, and we've installed pressure gauges in 3 wells. We tested the lower reservoirs, the better quality reservoirs in SNE 2. These flowed so well that the equipment wasn't sufficient to measure the flow rates. So the rates we announced were constrained by the equipment. So all the wells saw some good flow rates. The last 2 wells, SNE 5 and 6, were part of an interference test that we carried out to look at the degree of communication between wells in those upper sands. And I'm just going to focus on that small area in the southern part of the field. So this is an extraction from our reservoir model through SNE 5 and 6 and focusing on the 480 reservoir, which is a unit we focused on. Now, an interference test is designed to optimise the spacing and orientation between your producing wells and the water injector wells, where we inject water to maintain reservoir pressure and keep flow rates high. So in the interference test, you perforate the well, and oil will flow into the well bore, and that will cause a reduction in pressure close to the well bore. And that pressure pulse will propagate away from the well, and then you measure the arrival time and the magnitude of that pulse in your listening wells where you have the gauges. Now, we've got a very good response in SNE 5, and that really helped us to remove some of the final uncertainties that we had in terms of designing the development. All right, so looking forward, the SNE field is a very large area of oil, so it's going to be a staged development with a focus in the hub. It's an FPSO with capacity to expand via satellites. Now, the lower part of this slide are the operator numbers. Our numbers tend to vary a little bit, but I'm giving the operator numbers here. First oil, 2021 to 2023, with a plateau production of 75 to 125,000 barrels per day. Development expenditure is $13 to $15 per barrel, OPEX 12 to 14. So the cost to produce the oil is in the range of $25 to $29 per barrel. Now, NPV per barrel, care numbers $10 per barrel. We put out numbers of more like $13 per barrel, so there's a bit of a range. But if you calculate out using the operator numbers, the value of the field right now is about $5.6 billion, of which we have just under $1 billion of value. Now, the latest numbers, Ken put these out in August, don't include the interference test results. So those will increase the recovery factors, so that will filter through into the more recent releases. So we'll be making a release in probably the next month. So there's a lot of value in this field, and the fiscal terms in Senegal are some of the best in the world. All right, so going back to 2013, no deep water wells, and in fact no offshore drilling for 35 years. If we fast forward to today, there's our discoveries. Cosmos has made a series of very large gas discoveries in northern Senegal and Mauritania, and since our first wells, there has not been a dry well, and we certainly hope to continue that trend. Now, we drilled a number of exploration wells. Vega Regulus, I mentioned, that was drilled in the west. A very good appraisal result in the SNE reservoirs. It was deepened by 1,000 metres to test a carbonate section, which was pretty high risk. There was oil there, but quite tight reservoir. We then moved to Fan South. This is a separate feature to the Fan well. We encountered oil in one of the reservoirs that we saw in Fan, and we learned a lot about the reservoir section in that well. So that will be used to help us understand the seismic and to plan the appraisal for the Fan discovery, which has been put on the back burner while we appraise SNE, but we'll be working on that shortly. We then went a long trend from SNE to drill SNE North. This found multiple stacked hydrocarbon columns, and this is a separate feature to SNE. There was oil and a condensate-rich gas in the upper reservoirs, and there was oil in the deeper reservoirs below the SNE oil-water contact. And what this means is we have multiple exploration targets going north of SNE, and this is quite exciting for some of the other prospects we have. What does that look like? Well, this is a seismic line going through SNE and then north into the SNE North feature. So if we look at where that well was drilled, oil, condensate, and then that deep oil as well. Now, as we move north from here, we have the Speaker prospect, so that's drilling another culmination along this trend, and we now have 3 objective levels, possibly 4 objective levels to explore for. So as I said, that's pretty exciting. Right, well, the other thing we've done is we've enlarged our portfolio. So as soon as we TD'd SNE, we could see this was really a new play type in the area, and we started to look at where else might this play exist. And an obvious place is next door. So we started looking at the data, and we held talks with the operators in those areas. Negotiations started, but they were somewhat protracted, you might say. A 3D seismic survey came available, which we purchased, and that helped us to confirm what we call the Sama prospect. Sama means elephant in the local dialect. We concluded that farm in March of this year, and we are now 80% equity holder and the operator. And this shows really why we're doing this. We're looking at the same reservoirs as SNE. We know a lot about them, and we're chasing that same trend. So the SNE field shown here and the Sama prospect just to the south. The cross-section shows them as separated by a saddle. On some of our depth models, they are connected. So this is considered a very, very prospective feature. And we'll be drilling this in the second half of next year. And we have some other prospects too, but less mature. We've also formed a strategic alliance with the Chinese National Oil Company, and that covers the Senegal and Gambia areas. This allows us to jointly explore for new opportunities in that area. CNOOC brings a lot of resources to that partnership. They have a lot of very deep financial pockets, and they've got a big technical resource base. So they're a very strong partner. Now, we've been in Senegal for 11 years. A lot of what we've done is to do with education and health, and that's an ongoing thing. We're also involved in the Senegal national sport, which is soccer, and we sponsor some of the soccer programs in the country. That's extremely popular with the locals. So that's quite a rewarding thing as well. All right, so right now we're in the development and planning stage. We'll move into the engineering and construction phase, first oil, 2021 to 23. We'll be seeking a drill partner in the Gambia, and negotiations are advanced in that respect. And now that the political situation in Guinea-Bissau has settled down, we'll be refocusing on that area as well. So the question cheekily posed, it's our graphics department, and the elephant is well and truly getting out of the water now. Thank you.